The morning mist clung to the mountain pass like a silk veil as a lone merchant's wagon approached the notorious Dragon's Throat checkpoint. Unlike the usual traders who hurried through with fear in their eyes, this one guided her horses with deliberate grace, her slender fingers dancing across the reins like a weaver working invisible threads. The bandits watching from their hidden posts couldn't know that those same graceful hands had once orchestrated a deadly ballet that left 17 of the Emperor's finest assassins dead in a single night. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Lin Wei hadn't chosen the treacherous Gold Scale Road for any particular reason. It was simply another route on her endless journey across the Middle Kingdom. Her trader's cart bore the dust of 1,000 miles, while the silver streak in her otherwise raven-black hair caught the morning light like moonlight on still water. The few travelers who passed her quickly averted their eyes, unsettled by her stillness and the way she seemed to fade into the mist despite traveling in plain sight. The checkpoint itself was larger than most she'd encountered recently. Steep cliffs rose on either side of the narrow pass, creating a natural bottleneck that had made the Dragon's Throat infamous among merchants. A crude wooden gate spanned the gap, while rough-hewn watchtowers loomed above. Between them, life. At the checkpoint played out like a well-worn scroll painting, guards demanding bribes, merchants arguing prices, and bandits barely pretending to be legitimate toll collectors. The only sound as Lin Wei's wagon approached was the soft creak of well-oiled wheels and the barely audible whisper of her boots shifting on the driver's bench. Even her horses, chosen for their quiet temperament, made less noise than falling leaves. A young guard playing dice nearby stopped mid-throw, the bone cubes forgotten in his hand, as he watched the unusual merchant guide her wagon toward the gate. Chen Lao, the self-proclaimed guardian of the pass, was collecting his morning bribes, when he felt, rather than heard, someone approach. He turned to find the female merchant waiting patiently, offering a silver tael with one hand, while the other remained hidden in the folds of her indigo trader's robe. "Your toll," she said, her voice soft as autumn rain. The guard captain couldn't help but notice how her robe parted slightly, revealing the elaborate silver clasp of a merchant's money belt. But there was something else about her, something in the way she held herself, like a bamboo reed, seemingly delicate but possessing hidden strength. Chen Lao had seen enough fighters pass through his checkpoint to recognize the difference between a merchant who carried defensive weapons out of necessity and someone who wore their weapons like they were born to them. This woman was definitely the latter. "Traveling alone is dangerous for a merchant," he said, making no move to take the silver, especially one carrying such fine silks. He nodded toward her wagon, where bolts of expensive fabric were visible beneath the oiled canvas. "Cover!" "The roads are dangerous for everyone," Lin Wei replied, her dark eyes revealing nothing. "That's why I pay my tolls promptly." A burst of raucous laughter drew their attention to a group of guards gathered around a fire pit. The notorious twin. Vipers, Dao swords strapped to their backs, were terrorizing a spice merchant, casually tossing his samples into the flames while their companions roared with approval. The merchant's face showed fear, but also resignation. This wasn't his first encounter with bandits masquerading as legitimate authorities. For a moment something flickered in Lin Wei's eyes, a hint of emotion quickly buried beneath her serene expression. She had sworn to avoid trouble, to maintain her cover, to stay away from situations that might expose her true identity. But as she stood there, the weight of her hidden knives felt heavier than usual, like old friends urging her toward an uncomfortable truth. Her quiet contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Madame Zhang, her arms full of medicinal herbs for her apothecary shop. She paused when she saw Lin Wei, taking in her travel-worn appearance and the subtle way she carried herself, like A coiled spring waiting to unwind. Unlike the others who hurried past with downcast eyes, Madame Zhang met her gaze directly. "You carry an unusual burden for a silk merchant," she observed, her direct manner a sharp contrast to the fearful glances of other travelers. Lin Wei turned those dark eyes on her, and for the first time that day spoke more than a few words. Her voice was soft as shadow, but clear as mountain spring water. "Just passing through, respected elder, though I expect I'll need to rest my horses before moving on." Madame Zhang nodded toward her shop, built into the very rock of the cliff face. "You'll find shelter there, though I'd suggest waiting until evening. The twin vipers tend to grow meaner as the day progresses. We've already lost 2 good merchants who tried to stand up to them." As if to emphasize her point, another burst of laughter erupted from the fire pit, followed by the sound of breaking pottery and a merchant's frightened plea. Lin Wei's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her stance, a subtle adjustment that made her seem somehow more present, more solid. The air around her grew still, like the moment before a storm breaks over the mountains. "Appreciate the warning," she said quietly, though her eyes never left the scene by the fire pit. "But I've learned it's best to handle some things before they have a chance to grow worse." Madame Zhang studied her for a moment longer, noting the way her right hand rested casually near her waist, the way her feet had shifted almost imperceptibly into a stance she recognized from her own youth in the martial arts quarters of the imperial city. "Just remember, stranger, this checkpoint's seen enough blood lately. We don't need any more bodies in the ravine below." Lin Wei finally looked back at her, and for just a moment, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Yes, respected elder, I've seen enough of those myself." Then she stepped away from her wagon and headed toward the fire pit, her footsteps as quiet as her reputation. What no one at Dragon's Throat knew, not yet, was that they were about to witness why some called her Shadow Silk, not because of the fine fabrics she traded, but because by the time you saw her blade, it was already too late. The gathering around the fire pit fell quiet for exactly 3 heartbeats when Lin Wei approached. The dice players paused their game, the guards stopped their harassment, and even the twin vipers halted their torment of the spice merchant. Only Chen Lao, still holding the untaken silver tail, seemed too preoccupied with his own thoughts to notice the shift in atmosphere. The morning mist swirled through the checkpoint, weaving between the rough-hewn pillars and curling around the feet of the gathered crowd like ghostly serpents. The checkpoint itself was a testament to darker times. The gates bore scars from countless raids, and the watchtowers had been rebuilt so many times that they resembled a child's uneven stack of blocks. The silence broke with a harsh laugh from Fang, the elder of the twin vipers. "Well, look what the mountain wind blew in, brother," he said, nudging his twin. "Some kind of delicate silk peddler." "Nah," Lei replied, running his thumb along the edge of his Dao sword. "Too cold for a merchant, probably another wandering widow looking to sell her dead husband's wares." The identical grins they wore suggested they'd found their morning's entertainment. Their matching green tunics, stolen from a caravan of imperial guards months ago, were stained with substances best left unidentified. Lin Wei moved to the fire pit with that same quiet grace, seemingly deaf to the taunts. Each step was precisely placed, her soft boots making no sound on the stone-strewn ground. The spice merchant, a middle-aged man with graying temples, used her arrival as a distraction to scramble away from his tormentors, though the scent of his burning merchandise still filled the air. "Your business here?" Chen Lao called out, finally noticing the brewing confrontation. His hand never strayed far from the sword at his hip. "Tea," Lin Wei said softly, removing a small package from her sleeve and placing it on a flat stone near the fire. "The morning is cold." The word rippled through the checkpoint like a pebble in a still pond, drawing snickers from the gathered bandits. Several legitimate merchants began quietly moving their wagons back from the gate, recognizing the familiar signs of impending violence. "Did you hear that, boys?" Fang called out, shoving the remains of the spice merchant's wares aside. "The little silk seller wants to have tea." His massive frame shook with laughter as he stood, towering over most men in the area. "You sure you wouldn't rather offer us something more valuable?" His eyes roamed meaningfully over her wagon. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The guard who had been playing dice, Zhang, who by name though none of the bandits ever bothered to learn it, took advantage of the distraction to help the spice merchant salvage what remained of his goods. His face was flushed with shame and anger, but his eyes showed a spark of hope as he watched the quiet merchant. He'd seen plenty of would-be heroes pass through the checkpoint, most of them now feeding the crows in the ravine, but something about this one was different. Lin Wei didn't respond to Fang's suggestion. She simply began preparing tea with practiced movements, each gesture precise and economical. This seemed to infuriate Lei even more than his brother's crudeness. "I'm talking to you, silk seller," the younger twin growled, taking 3 heavy steps forward. The ornate Dao sword at his back rang softly against its scabbard, and a half-empty wine jar rattled off a nearby stone. "Ain't you got any manners? Where I come from, it's rude not to answer when spoken to." "Where I come from," Lin Wei replied, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying to every corner of the checkpoint like wind through bamboo. "It's rude to waste good spices." She still hadn't looked up from her tea preparations, but her reflection in the small bronze kettle showed eyes as dark and deep as a mountain lake in winter. The checkpoint grew quiet again, but this time with anticipation. Lei's face darkened, like storm clouds gathering over the peaks. "You trying to tell me how to conduct my business, woman?" His hand strayed closer to his Dao sword, worn high on his back in the mountain bandit style he'd adopted but never properly mastered. "No." Lin Wei measured out tea leaves with precise movements, each one carefully weighed like a merchant counting coins. "Just making an observation." Each word was carefully chosen, like a blade being tested for balance. The twin vipers had risen, to their full height now, moving to flank the fire pit with the practiced coordination of predators working together. Their matching grins had taken on a predatory edge, made more menacing by the ritual scars that curved along their left cheeks, marks they'd earned in the brutal fighting pits of Tianjiang province. "Seems to me," Fang said, his Dao sword singing, as he drew it partially from its sheath, "this merchant needs a lesson in local customs." "Seems to me," Lei added, mirroring his brother's movements perfectly, "she needs to learn her place." Lin Wei finally looked up, her dark eyes scanning the checkpoint with deliberate slowness. She noted the positions of all 7 bandits. The twins by the fire, Chen Lao trying to fade into the background, and 4 more slowly circling to cut off her escape routes. The way they moved told her everything she needed to know. They were killers, yes, but undisciplined ones. Her expression remained serene, but something in those deep eyes made Chen Lao take 2 steps back. "I know my place," Lin Wei said quietly. "Do you know yours?" The question hung in the morning air like incense smoke in a temple. Fang's laugh boomed through the checkpoint's stone walls. "Boys, did you hear that? This little silk moth thinks she can—" "I think," Lin Wei interrupted, her soft voice somehow cutting through his bluster like a blade through silk, "that you're used to being the vipers in this pass. But you might want to consider something." She poured the tea with exaggerated care. Sometimes what looks like prey is actually something else entirely. "Is that supposed to be a threat?" Lei's hand moved to his sword hilt, his face twisted in an ugly snarl. "No." Lin Wei's eyes grew darker still, like the depths of a well at midnight. "Just another observation, like how you both favor your right leg slightly. Old pit-fighting injuries, I'd guess. Means you'll strike high and wide. Or how your leader back there keeps his sword hand low. suggests he relies more on intimidation than skill. Her gaze shifted to the men behind her without turning her head. Or how your friends are breathing too hard already, nervous about what's coming. The silence in the checkpoint now was absolute. Even the mountain wind seemed to hold its breath, and the morning mist curled around them like an audience gathering for a performance. The early sun had risen higher, casting sharp shadows across the stone ground, as if nature itself was setting the stage for what was to come. "You sure talk pretty for a dead woman," Fang snarled, his fingers twitching on his sword hilt. Lin Wei sighed, a sound so soft it was almost lost in the tension. "I gave you a chance to share tea. Remember that." Her eyes moved to Madame Zhang, who watched from her shop entrance. "Sorry about the mess that's coming." What happened next would be talked about in Dragon's Throat for years to come. 7 of the most notorious bandits in the northern provinces against one quiet merchant, and it was over before anyone could draw a full breath. The morning after, the incident dawned clear and cold over Dragon's Throat checkpoint. The sun painted the cliffs in shades of amber as Master Wu, the newly appointed Imperial Inspector, stood by the fire pit, studying the aftermath with a mixture of professional interest and personal amazement. Chen Lao sat nearby, providing his statement, while a scribe recorded every word. The former guard captain's arrogance had evaporated like morning dew, replaced by a kind of stunned humility. The twin vipers lay in Madame Zhang's infirmary, their Dao swords now decorating the apothecary's wall as a reminder. Both would walk again, eventually, though their matching limps would be more pronounced than before. "Never seen anything like it," Chen Lao was saying, shaking his head in disbelief as he wrapped his hands around a cup of the same tea she had offered. 7 men, all armed, all experienced fighters, down in the space of a few heartbeats, and not one of them died, though I warrant they wished they had when she was done with them. Master Wu knelt to examine a knife mark in one of the stone blocks, precise and clean as a calligrapher's stroke. "And you say she used only throwing knives? No sword? No major weapons?" "Yes, sir. Small blades that seemed to appear from nowhere, like leaves falling from an autumn tree, each one finding its mark with surgical precision, disabling, but never killing. It was—" he searched for the right word. "It was like watching a dance." Before the inspector could respond, Madame Zhang emerged from her shop, her healer's apron bearing the stains of her night's work. "The vipers will live," she announced, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely pleased with this outcome. "Though their pit-fighting days are definitely behind them." Master Wu could respond only when Brother Ming appeared, his orange monk's robes gathering dust as he joined their conversation. "The heavenly way works in mysterious ways," he said, though his eyes held a knowing look that suggested he might have seen similar mysteries before. "Perhaps the Buddha sent us a guardian spirit." "Spirits don't usually carry throwing knives," Master Wu replied dryly, "and they don't typically appear just when the Dragonclaw Brotherhood is planning something big." The mention of the notorious Bandit clan cast a shadow over the group. Everyone knew the Twin Vipers were just the advance. Guard, the Brotherhood's leader, the one they called the Dragon Master, was rumored to be gathering his forces for something major, and now 7 of his men had been humiliated by a traveling merchant. "He'll come looking for revenge," Madame Zhang said, voicing what they were all thinking. "The Dragon Master won't let this stand." The conversation paused as young Jin limped by a bundle of medicinal herbs in his arms. The former soldier nodded to the group before adding his thoughts. "Saw her at first light, tending to her horses. Asked me about proper care for blade wounds. Polite as you please. Woman knows her steel." He flexed his battle-scarred hands meaningfully. "Recognized the techniques too. Said she'd seen similar work during the Imperial Wars." "The wars?" Master Wu's eyes narrowed. "Which side?" "Didn't ask, didn't tell," young Jin shrugged. "But she paid in Imperial gold, if that means anything." Lin Wei, the young guard, joined them next, still excited from his morning's encounter. "You should see how she handles those knives. Got me teaching the other guards some basic defensive stances. Says a prepared defense is better than hasty revenge when trouble's brewing." Old Lady Sun, who had somehow materialized among them without anyone noticing her approach, clicked her tongue. "Trouble's been brewing since the Dragon Master set his sights on our checkpoint. Question is, what side is this merchant really on?" The group fell silent as Lin Wei herself emerged from Madame Zhang's shop, a small bundle of herbs in her hands. She moved with that same fluid grace, acknowledging their presence with a slight nod, but offering no words. The silence held until she disappeared around the corner of the storehouse. "Well," Brother Ming said finally, "whatever her purpose here, I suspect we'll all find out soon enough. The Dragon Master isn't known for his patience." "Or his mercy," Madame Zhang added softly, remembering the last time someone had stood up. To the Brotherhood, Master Wu touched his official seal thoughtfully. "Keep your eyes open, all of you, and maybe say a prayer or two, Brother Ming. Something tells me Dragon's Throat is about to become the center of a storm." As if in response to his words, a cold wind gusted through the pass, carrying with it the first hints of mountain snow. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the peaks like the drums of war. The afternoon shadows lengthened across the stone-strewn ground as a cloud of dust approached Dragon's Throat from the southern road. Through his spyglass, Lin Wei counted at least 20 riders, their horses pushing hard despite the treacherous mountain path. At their head rode a figure in ornate black armor, the Dragon Master himself. From her vantage point on the temple roof, where she'd been helping Brother Ming repair storm damage, Lin Wei watched the approaching force with the same quiet intensity she brought to everything. The wind carried the faint jingle of weapons and the creak of leather armor, along with the distinctive sound of war drums carried by the Brotherhood scouts. "Troubles found us sooner than expected," Brother Ming said, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "Those are the Dragon Master's elite riders, the ones who raided the Imperial Treasury last spring. 10 Imperial guards died that day." Lin Wei collapsed the spyglass with a soft click. 12. 2 messenger boys tried to raise the alarm. Her voice carried a weight that suggested she knew more than just tavern tales of the incident. Down in the checkpoint, Master Wu was already mobilizing what passed for defense at Dragon's Throat. Lin Wei ran from building to building, warning people to take shelter, while young Jin began distributing the weapons they'd been secretly gathering. "You don't have to stay," Brother Ming said quietly. "You've done enough already. No one would blame you for continuing your journey." A ghost of a smile touched Lin Wei's lips. "Running's what got me here in the first place. Maybe it's time to stop." She started down the temple ladder, each movement precise and measured. "Besides, someone once told me that the Buddha works in mysterious ways." The monk's knowing laugh followed her down. "I don't recall the sutras mentioning throwing knives as instruments of enlightenment." "Then you might want to read them again," Lin Wei replied, reaching the ground. "The warrior monk of Song Mountain had his staff. I have these." Her hands briefly brushed the hidden sheaths where her knives waited like sleeping dragons. The approaching riders were close enough now that their individual features became clear. The Dragon Master cut an imposing figure even at a distance, his black armor adorned with gold inlays that caught the fading sunlight. Flanking him were the infamous Shadow Twins, former Imperial assassins turned bandits, and behind them rode a mix of deserters and mountain brigands, all hardened killers. Madame Zhang stood in the doorway of her shop, a string of medicinal needles held confidently in her hands. "You should have killed them last night," she called to Lin Wei as she passed. "The vipers would have been 2 less to deal with now." "Killing's easier than living with the killing," she answered, not breaking stride. "Sometimes mercy leaves a deeper mark than murder." The checkpoint had gone eerily quiet, with only the mountain wind and the approaching hoofbeats breaking the silence. Master Wu stood at the gate, his imperial seal gleaming defiantly in the sun. Young Jin tried to match his steady stance, but couldn't quite hide his trembling hands. "This isn't your fight," the inspector said, as Lin Wei joined him. "You don't owe this checkpoint anything." "No," she agreed, "but sometimes a fight picks you." She studied the approaching riders with those dark eyes. "You might want to get your younger guards off the gate. They're not ready for what's coming." Before he could respond, the thunder of hooves announced the Brotherhood's arrival. They reined up in a cloud of dust before the gate, spreading out in a practiced formation that spoke of military training. The Dragon Master urged his horse forward, the beast's steel-shod hooves striking sparks from the stone ground. "Well, well," the Dragon Master's voice carried the cultured accent of the imperial court, incongruous with his current occupation. "So this is the merchant who had the temerity to lay hands on my men. I must admit you're not quite what I expected." Lin Wei said nothing, but her stillness seemed to intensify like the air before a lightning strike. "Not much for conversation, are you?" The Dragon Master's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's fine. We're not here to talk. You hurt 7 of my men, made them look like fools. That requires a response." "They did that themselves," Lin Wei replied softly. "I just helped them realize it." A muscle twitched in the Dragon Master's jaw. "You know, I've heard whispers about a woman like you. They say there's a ghost that haunts the northern roads, leaving broken men, but no bodies in her wake. Some call her Shadow Silk." He leaned forward in his saddle. "They also say she's running from something, or someone." For the first time, something flickered in Lin Wei's dark eyes, a recognition, or perhaps a warning. The air seemed to grow thicker, heavier with unspoken threats. "Here's my offer," the Dragon Master continued. "Join us. A woman with your skills could go far in my organization. No more running, no more looking over your shoulder. What do you say?" "I've had better offers from better men," Lin Wei replied, her soft voice carrying across the stone courtyard. "And they're all dead." "Now!" The tension broke as the Dragon Master threw back his head and laughed, though the sound held no warmth. "Well, brothers," he called to his men, "it seems our friend here prefers to do things the hard way." He straightened in his saddle, all traces of humor vanishing. "You have until sundown to reconsider. After that—" He let the threat hang in the air before wheeling his horse around. As the Brotherhood rode out, Master Wu turned to Lin Wei. "You've bought us a few hours at least, but we both know they'll be back with twice the numbers." 3 times, Lin Wei corrected quietly, her eyes remaining fixed on the dust cloud of departing riders. "He'll send men to the high passes before sundown." She turned to the inspector. "You should evacuate the checkpoint." "This is our post." Madame Zhang's voice cut through the tension as she approached, needle still in hand. "We're not running." Something in the way she said it made Lin Wei turn to study her more carefully. The sun caught the grey at her temples, and for the first time, Lin Wei noticed the faint scars on her hands, the kind that come from years of healing others, from standing your ground when others would have fallen. She met Lin Wei's gaze without flinching, a feat few had managed. "The last time the Brotherhood came through," she continued, "they killed my son. Cut him down right where you're standing, because he dared to treat injured Imperial soldiers." Her knuckles whitened around her needles. "I buried him in the temple garden, next to the herbs he helped me grow. I'm not leaving him alone." Lin Wei's expression softened almost imperceptibly, a brief crack in her serene mask. "Running's what kept me alive this long," she replied, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Is that what you call living?" Madame Zhang gestured at her merchants. "Robes, the dust of endless roads that spoke of constant movement. Always moving, never staying long enough to let the morning dew settle." Before Lin Wei could respond, Old Lady Sun's voice rang out from her tea-house porch. Well, if you two are done trading philosophy, perhaps we should discuss how to keep our checkpoint from becoming a killing ground. Lin Wei stepped back, composing herself, while Madame Zhang's face hardened with determination. But something had shifted between them, like ice cracking on a winter river. "The Old One has a point," Master Wu interjected. "We need a plan. The Brotherhood will hit us from all sides when they come. They've done it before in other passes. Then, we'll need to be ready on all sides," Madame Zhang said, her healer's manner giving way to something harder. "My shop overlooks the southern approach. The upper windows would make good positions." Lin Wei shook her head. "Too obvious. They'll expect that." She turned in a slow circle, studying the checkpoint with a tactician's eye. "We need to change the rules of their game." "What do you mean?" the inspector asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "The Dragon Master thinks like an imperial commander," Lin Wei explained, her soft voice taking on a teacher's patience. "He'll approach this like a military operation because that's what he knows. We need to make this personal." Madame Zhang watched her closely. "You've faced him before, haven't you? That's what he meant about running from someone." For a long moment Lin Wei was silent, her eyes distant, as if seeing something far beyond the stone walls of Dragon's Throat. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than ever. 3 years ago, the Dragon Master and his men raided an imperial field hospital near the northern border. They were looking for medicine and supplies, but things got out of hand. By the time they left, 15 people were dead, including 3 young apprentice healers. Her hand unconsciously touched a thin scar at her throat. "I was there, serving as the hospital's guard. Couldn't stop them. They had numbers and surprise. But I made a promise to the dying that day." "What kind of promise?" Madame Zhang asked gently. "The kind that keeps a woman moving," she replied, meeting her eyes. "The kind that doesn't let her rest until it's fulfilled." The wind had picked up again, carrying with it the first bite of winter. Somewhere in the distance a temple bell tolled, marking the hours until sundown. "Well," Madame Zhang said finally, "maybe it's time to stop moving and start standing." She reached out and brushed some dust from Lin Wei's sleeve, the gesture surprisingly maternal. "We may not be much, but Dragon's Throat takes care of its own. And right now, that includes you." For the first time since she'd arrived at the checkpoint, something like warmth crept into Lin Wei's dark eyes. "You don't know what you're asking." "Maybe not," she smiled, "but I know what I'm offering. A chance to stop running, to find something worth fighting for besides old promises to the dead." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courtyard as Lin Wei made her way to the stables, her mind churning with thoughts she'd rather ignore. Young Jin was there, tending to her horses with careful attention. "She's got a way about her, doesn't she?" young Jin said without looking up. "Madame Zhang, I mean. Seen plenty of people try to stand up to the Brotherhood since her son died. None of them had her steel." "I'm not trying to stand with anyone," Lin Wei replied, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. "No, miss, of course not." Young Jin's smile suggested he knew better. "Just like you're not thinking about riding out before sundown." Lin Wei's hand froze on her horse's bridle. "What makes you say that? Because that's what you do, isn't it? Stay just long enough to make a difference, then disappear before anyone can get too close." The former soldier's insight belied his years. "Seen the type before. Not the knife-throwing part, but the running part." Before Lin Wei could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts and the sound of shattering pottery drew them both to the stable doors. In the courtyard, 2 of the Brotherhood's men, not from the morning's group, were terrorizing a group of pilgrims, throwing their offerings to the ground while the travelers huddled against the temple wall. "Testing our responses, Lin," we muttered, her hand moving to where her knives waited. "Seeing if we're preparing defenses." Master Wu's voice cut through the tension. "Enough," he called out, striding forward, though his hand stayed well away from his sword. "This is an imperial checkpoint, not a bandit's playground." The two Brotherhood members turned, evil grins spreading across their faces. "Well, look here," the taller one drawled. "The Emperor's lapdog thinks he has fangs." "Careful now," Lin Wei's quiet voice somehow carried over the commotion. She'd materialized beside the pilgrims like a ghost, her merchant's robes barely stirring in the mountain wind. "Those fangs might be sharper than you think," the bandits spun, hands dropping to their weapons. "This ain't your business, merchant," the shorter one snarled. "You made it my business when you started terrorizing pilgrims." Lin Wei's eyes had gone cold again, like mountain pools in winter. "Now you've got two choices: ride out or join your friends in Madame Zhang's infirmary." The bandits exchanged glances, weighing their odds. Their hands hovered near their weapons, but something in Lin Wei's stillness made them hesitate. "Dragon Master ain't gonna like this," the short one muttered. "Dragon Master isn't here," Lin Wei replied softly. "I am." After another tense moment, they backed away, mounted their horses and rode out, but not before the taller one called back. "This ain't over. The Master's got plans for this checkpoint and for you." As the dust settled, Madame Zhang approached, a pouch of scattered herbs in her hands. "You didn't have to step in. We've handled their kind before." "I know." Lin Wei studied her with those dark eyes. "That's what worries me." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're too willing to die for this place." She gestured at the checkpoint around them. "All of you are, and the Dragon Master knows it. He'll use that against you." Madame Zhang stepped closer, her eyes flashing. "And you're not willing to die for anything, is that it? Just keep moving, keep running, never plant your feet and say, 'This far, no further.'" "I've planted my feet before," Lin Wei said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Watched good people die because of it, because they believed in something bigger than themselves, because they trusted me to—" She caught herself, turned away. "To what?" Madame Zhang pressed. "To save them, to make everything right." When Lin Wei didn't answer, she grabbed her arm, forcing her to face her. "You can't save everyone, Lin Wei, but you can choose who you stand with when the killing starts." For a long moment they stood there, Madame Zhang's hand on her arm, the air between them charged with things unsaid. Finally, Lin Wei spoke, her voice rough with emotion she usually kept buried. "I chose wrong before. People died because of it. Because I trusted the wrong commander, believed the wrong promises." Her eyes met the healer's. "What makes you think I'll choose right this time?" "Because this time you're not choosing alone." Madame Zhang's voice softened. "Look around you, Lin Wei. This isn't just my fight or Master Wu's fight. It's everyone's fight. Even young Jin here, who's seen enough war to last 10 lifetimes but still stands ready to defend his home." Young Jin straightened at her words, pride evident in his stance despite his limp. "The Brotherhood's coming," Lin Wei said, stating the obvious, "with everything they have. And when they do, all your courage and conviction won't stop their blades." "No," Madame Zhang agreed. "But maybe that's not what we need." A smile touched her lips. "Maybe what we need is someone who knows how to make blades go where they'll do the most good. Someone who understands men like the Dragon Master, because she's been running from them for so long." The weight of their words hung in the cold mountain, air punctuated by the sound of hammering as people began fortifying the checkpoint's defenses. The sun crept closer to the western peaks, marking the hours until the Brotherhood's return. Finally, Lin Wei spoke again, her voice carrying a decision. That surprised even her. "Get everyone together at the temple. If we're going to make a stand, we need to do it smart." The temple's main hall was packed with defenders as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. Brother Ming stood near the altar, his usual serene expression replaced by one of grim determination. Master Wu leaned against a pillar, his imperial seal catching the light from the paper lanterns, while Madame Zhang sat in the front row, her needles laid out before her with deadly precision. "Lin," we stood before them all, her quiet presence somehow filling the space more effectively than any shouted speech could have. The checkpoint's inhabitants watched her with a mixture of hope and uncertainty, the merchant who had become their unlikely defender. "The Dragon Master will come from 3 directions," she began, her soft voice carrying to every corner of the temple. "He'll have men approaching from both ends of the pass, and another group coming down from the cliffs. It's how he took White Crane Pass last year. And you know this because," Master Wu asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Because I was there," Lin Wei replied, her eyes distant. "Watching from the shadows, learning his tactics, understanding how he thinks." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "That's why I know what he expects, and why we're going to do something different." "We're outnumbered 4-1, Young Jin raised his hand. "Even if every man and woman here takes up arms." "Numbers don't always tell the whole story," Lin Wei said, moving to the crude map she'd drawn on a temple scroll. "The Dragon Master thinks like an imperial commander, but this isn't a battlefield. It's your home. Every path, every cave, every hidden corner, you know them better than his men ever could." Madame Zhang stood, understanding dawning in her eyes. "We can use the secret passages." A murmur ran through the crowd. During the checkpoint's early days, a network of passages had been carved into the mountain itself, originally for moving supplies during border raids. Most had been forgotten, but a few were still accessible. "Exactly," Lin Wei nodded. "But first, we need to change how the Dragon Master sees this fight. He's expecting a straightforward resistance, armed men behind walls and windows. We need to show him something else entirely." Old Lady Sun cackled from her seat near the back. "Oh, I like where this is going. We're going to put on a show for them, aren't we?" "More than that," Lin Wei replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "We're going to give them exactly what they expect, just not where they expect it." She turned to young Jin. "How many spare sets of armor do we have in the checkpoint?" "Dozen or so between the guardhouse and Master Wu's stores." "Good. We'll need them all, and every spare weapon you can find." Lin Wei's eyes took on an intensity that made several people shift in their seats. "By the time the Dragon Master arrives, this checkpoint is going to look like it's defended by twice the people we actually have." For the next hour, Lin Wei laid out her plan. The checkpoint's inhabitants listened, asked questions, and began to see how their knowledge of Dragon's throat could become a weapon more powerful than any blade. Children who knew every hiding spot, healers who could move through secret passages unseen, merchants who remembered the old supply routes. Every piece of local knowledge became part of the strategy. But what about the actual fighting? Someone called out, "Most of us ain't never used a weapon in anger." "That's why we're not going to fight the way they expect," Lin Wei explained. "Master Wu and his guards will be visible on the walls, making a show of organizing a defense. Meanwhile, Madame Zhang and 3 others will be moving through the passages, ready to emerge behind their lines." She turned to Brother Ming. "I need you and Old Lady Sun to coordinate the movement of our decoys. Make those spare armors and dummy figures count." She looked to young Jin. "Your stable will be their primary target. They'll want to prevent us from escaping on horseback. I need you to make it look defended but empty." "A trap?" the former soldier asked, understanding gleaming in his eyes. "Of sorts." Lin Wei nodded. "But not the kind they're used to." As the meeting continued, Madame Zhang watched Lin Wei closely. The hesitation she'd seen earlier was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty that seemed to spread through the crowd. This was a woman who had spent years running, watching, learning, and now all that knowledge was being put to use, not for revenge, but for protection. When the planning was done and people began to file out to their assigned tasks, Madame Zhang approached her. "You've done this before, haven't you? Not just observed it, but planned it." Lin Wei was quiet for a moment, staring at the map she'd drawn. "Once, during the Imperial Wars. Different circumstances, different people, but the same principles. She turned to face her. It worked then, but the cost was too high, Madame Zhang finished for her. That's why you started running. Why I stopped, Lin Wei's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Stopped letting myself care what happened to people and places. But you care now, don't you? Despite trying not to. Before she could answer, young Jin called from the temple door, "Rider coming up the south path, one of our lookouts." The moment broke, and Lin Wei moved quickly to the door, Madame Zhang close behind. In the fading light, they could see a horse and rider approaching at full gallop, dust rising behind them, like a signal fire. "They're coming!" the rider shouted as he reined up. The Dragon Master's gathered his entire force, at least 40 men, maybe more. Lin Wei's expression didn't change, but her hand unconsciously moved to where her knives waited. "Then we'd better get started. Time to show them what this checkpoint is really made of." The sun had dipped below the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of purple and crimson, as Lin Wei stood in the temple's bell tower, watching the last preparations take place below. The checkpoint's inhabitants moved with purpose, setting up their elaborate deception under the cover of growing darkness. Brother Ming climbed up to join her, his orange robes making him nearly invisible in the twilight. "Thought I might find you up here," the monk said, settling beside Lin Wei. "Good vantage point or a good place to think about running?" "Both," Lin Wei admitted softly, her eyes never leaving the distant horizon where the Brotherhood would appear. "You know, brother, I've been wondering something since you first saw me fight. The way I handle the knives, the way I plan, that's Imperial training. But the way I move..." He let the observation hang in the air. For a long moment Lin Wei was silent, the weight of unspoken memories visible in her stance. Finally she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I wasn't always called Shadow Silk. Used to be Captain Lin Wei, Imperial Special Operations, during the wars and after." Her hand unconsciously touched the scar on her neck. The Emperor needed people who could move unseen, handle situations that couldn't officially exist. That's where I met him. Brother Ming's eyebrows rose. "The Dragon Master was one of yours?" "Other way around. He was Commander Zhao, my superior officer. The perfect Imperial commander with a perfect record." A bitter smile touched her lips. "Perfect at covering his tracks too. Didn't realize until too late that he was using our missions to build his own private army. Every rebel camp we eliminated, every weapons cache we seized, all part of his plan." "What changed?" "The field hospital." Lin Wei's voice grew even softer. "We were told it was a rebel medical station still operating after the wars." Zhao said, "They were treating guerrilla fighters, stockpiling medicines that rightfully belonged to the Empire. But when we got there..." She trailed off, her eyes seeing something far away and long ago. "It was just a hospital," Brother Ming finished quietly. Lin Wei nodded. "I tried to stop it, but Zhao had already poisoned the minds of most of our unit. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were bandits with military training. When I drew my knives on him, his loyal men shot me with arrows, leaving me for dead. Among the people I failed to protect. But you survived. A mountain healer found me, tended my wounds. By the time I could travel again, Zhao and his men had disappeared into the borderlands. I've been tracking them ever since, watching their pattern, learning their methods. Not to kill them, there's been enough death. But to stop them. To make sure what happened at that hospital never happens again." Below them, Madame Zhang emerged from a hidden passage, carrying more supplies to their stage positions. Lin Wei's eyes followed her movement, a fact not lost. "On Brother Ming, and now?" the monk asked. "What's different about this time, this place?" "Everything," Lin Wei admitted. "These people, they're not just fighting for survival. They're fighting for their home, their future. Like those people at the hospital were." She turned to face Brother Ming directly. "I've spent years running. telling myself I was hunting Zhao, but really, I was running from what happened that day, from the choice I made too late. And now you have another choice to make. Already made it, Lin Wei said, checking her knives with practiced ease. When I stepped into that confrontation instead of passing by, when I saw how this checkpoint refuses to break even with the Brotherhood's shadow over it. These people, she paused, watching Madame Zhang organize a group of defenders. They deserve better than what happened at that hospital. Brother Ming was quiet for a moment, digesting this revelation. You know, there's something in the sutras about a time for running and a time for standing. The warrior monk's teachings, Lin Wei nodded. A time for battle and a time for peace. You surprise me again, the monk smiled. Most warriors aren't well versed in temple writings. My mother was a temple scribe, Lin Wei explained. She taught me that a warrior's heart is measured not by how many fights they win, but by which fights they choose to take on. Her hand rested on her favorite knife. This blade belonged to her father. He carried it during the border wars, when the mountains were even wilder than they are now. Before Brother Ming could respond, a signal fire blazed to life on the southern ridge, the warning they'd arranged to mark the Brotherhood's approach. In the brief, fierce light, they could see dust clouds rising in the distance. Looks like it's time, Brother Ming said, rising to his feet. Are you ready to stop running? Lin Wei checked her knives one final time, her movements precise and unhurried. Been ready since I rode into this checkpoint, just didn't know it until now. She started toward the ladder. Better get everyone to their positions. Zhao may be a butcher now, but he's still a commander. He'll have scouts watching for any movement. May the Buddha go with you, Brother Ming called after her. Lin Wei paused on the ladder, looking back, with those dark eyes that now held a glimmer of something warmer. He already has. He led me here. As darkness settled over Dragon's throat, Lin Wei found Madame Zhang in her shop, meticulously preparing her healing needles. The lamplight cast long shadows across her face, deepening the lines that years of loss had etched there. I overheard, she said quietly, closing the door behind her. What you told Brother Ming in the bell tower. Lin Wei's hands stilled on her knives, but she didn't turn around. Wasn't meant for other ears. Maybe it should have been. Madame Zhang moved closer, her healer's robes rustling in the quiet room. All this time, we thought you were just another wandering merchant with a mysterious past. But you're something else entirely, aren't you? What I am, she replied softly, is what circumstance has made me. Nothing more. No, Madame Zhang's voice grew firm. You're what your choices made you, and you're still making choices right now. She reached past her to pick up a medicine pouch, her arm brushing Lin Wei's, like choosing to stay when you could have ridden out. Finally, Lin Wei turned to face her. In the lamplight, her dark eyes seemed to hold shadows and steel in equal measure. Maybe I'm just tired of running. Or maybe you finally found something worth standing still for. She met her gaze steadily. This checkpoint, these people, we're not just fighting for our homes, Lin Wei. We're fighting for the chance to build something better, like that hospital was trying to do. A muscle tightened in Lin Wei's jaw at the mention of the hospital. What happened there? It can't happen here. It won't, Madame Zhang said with quiet certainty, because this time you're not alone. This time you've got an entire checkpoint standing with you. She paused, then added softly, You've got me. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lin Wei studied the healer's face in the lamplight, seeing the strength that had kept her going after her son's death, the determination that had made her a pillar of the checkpoint's resistance. Before either could speak again, the temple bell began to toll, the signal they'd arranged to warn of the Brotherhood's final approach. Through the shop's window, they could see torches appearing on the mountain paths like fallen stars rising from the earth. The Dragon Master sat astride his black warhorse at the head of his men, the gold inlays of his armor catching the torchlight. Through his commander's spyglass, he studied the darkened checkpoint where only a few lights burned in scattered windows. "Looks quiet, Master," Shadow Twin Liu observed, riding up beside him. The former Imperial assassin adjusted his mask as he surveyed the checkpoint. "Too quiet, perhaps." "Indeed." The Dragon Master lowered his spyglass, a thin smile playing across his weathered features. "Our little Shadow Silk always did have a talent for deception. During the wars, she once made a rebel army think they were facing the entire Imperial Guard." The smile faded. "Cost us a good opportunity that day." The Dragon Master turned to address his assembled force, 40 of the most hardened killers in the northern provinces. The torchlight revealed an army that bore little resemblance to the disciplined Imperial unit they'd once been. Their armor was a patchwork of stolen gear and trophies, their faces marked by years of violence and cruelty. "Lin Wei thinks she knows." "Me," the Dragon Master announced, his cultured accent carrying clearly in the night air. "She thinks she can predict what I'll do because we served together, but she's forgotten something crucial." His eyes hardened. "I was commanding special operations while she was still learning to throw her first knife." He gestured to the checkpoint. "Below. She'll expect us to attack from 3 directions, both ends of the pass and from the cliffs. That's how we took White Crane Pass." A cruel smile touched his lips. "So we won't." The tension broke as the Dragon Master threw back his head and laughed, the sound echoing off the mountain walls like winter thunder. "Well, brothers," he called to his men, "it seems we have some ghosts to exorcise tonight." But as the Brotherhood began their advance, moving like shadows through the torchlit darkness, they failed to notice the faint glimmer of thread crisscrossing the ground before them. Thin silk strings connected to clever mechanisms hidden in the rocks. They didn't see the small figures moving through secret passages beneath their feet, or the way certain shadows seemed to move against the wind. They couldn't know that they were walking into a performance where every actor knew their part, where each piece had been placed with the precision of a master strategist who understood that sometimes the quietest blade struck the deepest. And as Lin Wei watched from her position, counting heartbeats until the moment of truth, she realized something that brought a ghost of a smile to her lips. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about running. She was thinking about tomorrow, about possibilities, about a future worth fighting for. And that, she realized, made all the difference in the world. What happened next would be talked about in Dragon's Throat for generations to come. The Brotherhood's advance turned into chaos as Lin Wei's carefully laid traps sprang to life. Silk threads pulled taut, triggering avalanches of smaller rocks that separated the attackers into confused groups. Hidden passages opened beneath their feet, swallowing entire squads into carefully prepared nets. "It's a trap!" Shadow Twin Liu shouted, but his warning came too late. From every shadow, defenders emerged wielding weapons with unexpected skill. Young Jin had trained them well. Master Wu's guards struck from prepared positions, while Madame Zhang's needles found their marks with deadly precision. The Dragon Master's fury echoed off the mountain walls. "Find her!" he roared. "Find Shadow Silk!" But Lin Wei was everywhere, and nowhere, her knives appearing out of the darkness with surgical precision. Each blade found its mark, disabling but never killing, just as she had at the hospital years ago. One by one, the Brotherhood's elite fighters fell, their wounds precise and deliberate. The Dragon Master, watching his perfect plan crumble, finally understood. "You're still playing the merciful fool, Lin Wei," he shouted into the chaos. "Still, can't do what needs to be done." "Wrong again, Commander." Her voice came from behind him, soft as silk but sharp as steel. "I'm doing exactly what needs to be done." He spun, drawing his sword with imperial precision, but she was already moving. Their dance was brief but spectacular, his military precision against her fluid grace. In the end, it wasn't even close. 3 knives flew in perfect harmony, one disarming him, one pinning his armor to a wooden post, and one resting against his throat. "You could have been something remarkable," the Dragon Master spat. "Could have helped me build an empire out. Here, instead you chose to play the hero." "No," Lin Wei replied softly. "I chose to be human." She turned to the assembled defenders who had emerged from their positions. "Take him to the Imperial garrison at Dawn Pass. All of them. Let them face proper justice." As the sun rose over Dragon's Throat the next morning, the checkpoint had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The physical signs of battle were already being cleared away, but the deeper changes were visible in the way people carried themselves, in the new confidence that marked their steps. Madame Zhang found Lin Wei at the temple, paying respects to the memory of her son. "You're not leaving, are you?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. Lin Wei turned, and for the first time since arriving at the checkpoint, she smiled fully. "No," she said softly. "I think I've found something worth staying for." The healer nodded, taking her hand. "Good. Because it turns out a skilled merchant who knows something about healing and defense might be exactly what this checkpoint needs." Together they walked out into the morning sun, where the first traders were already beginning to arrive, drawn by word of Dragon's Throat's transformation. The checkpoint had found its strength, and Lin Wei had finally found her home. Master Wu approached, a formal document in his hands. "The Imperial Court will want to know how we manage this. What should I tell them?" Lin Wei exchanged glances with Madame Zhang before answering. "Tell them that strength isn't always found in the blade or the fist. Sometimes it's found in the quiet moments, in standing together, in choosing to protect rather than destroy," Brother Ming's voice carried from the temple door. "And sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones who choose not to kill." The morning wind carried the sound of the temple bells across the mountains, announcing a new day for Dragon's Throat. Young Jin was already teaching a group of youngsters basic defensive stances, while Old Lady Sun's tea house buzzed with stories of the night's events. As for Lin Wei, she had finally stopped running. She had found something she never expected to find on her long journey. Not just a home, but a family, a purpose, and a chance to use her skills to protect rather than avenge. The merchant's road through Dragon's Throat would become known as one of the safest in the Middle Kingdom, protected by the legendary Shadow Silk, not because travelers feared her, but because they knew she and the checkpoint's defenders would always stand ready to protect those in need. If you've enjoyed this tale of redemption, courage, and finding one's true path, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Tomorrow we have another incredible story waiting for you. The tale of a humble fisherman who discovers an ancient secret beneath the waves. Remember to share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us where you're watching from. Until next time, may your own journey be as meaningful as Lin Wei's.